This is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 363.
There's a lot of different ways of working, and we've got to find out what is right for my company and for the people there. And if you think about it, the people coming to work, they might have to spend $10 on a tram, $50 for the car spot if you drove, $20 for lunch, $10 for coffee. By the time that person's come to work, it's cost them $50. So what is the experience I'm going to get by getting out my wallet and ultimately going into work for a day? Because I could just stay at home and my wallet could stay in my top drawer. So what's that experience that I'm expecting? And it's kind of like the expectations of my employer and a day of work and of my office, they just keep growing.
G'day, this is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 363. And our guest today is Brad Krauskopf, CEO and founder of Hub Australia, on designing inspiring flexible workspaces for the future and building workplace engagement and experience. I am your host, Greg Layton, founder of Chiefmaker and the Council of Chiefs. I believe there is a great chief in all of us, and that through listening to the stories, strategies and techniques of great CEOs and gurus, each of you can find and leave your own legacy through your work and life. The Inner Chief Podcast is where you will learn how to think and make moves like a CEO, like a true chief. For over a decade, I've helped CEOs and senior executives around the world boldly lead change, inspire their people, and leave a legacy. On the Inner Chief Podcast, I bring these stories to life with deep diving CEO interviews, interspersed with minisodes covering key leadership challenges, so you will find your own path to greatness as an executive. Chiefs, in this episode, I chat to Brad Krauskopf. Brad is an industry pioneer and has been at the forefront of the co-working and hybrid work revolution for more than a decade, having co-founded and co-chaired Flexible Workspaces Australia, the peak industry body for flexible and co-working space in Australia. Under his leadership, Hub Australia has expanded nationally, delivering human-centred, sustainable workplaces that help businesses attract the best talent and to thrive. Hub Australia is widely considered the market-leading workspace hospitality operator in Australia and has been ranked 6 years running by the Great Places to Work program. Brad is a passionate advocate for the future of workplace experience, bringing deep expertise in workplace strategy and property innovation. So today, in our CEO Masterclass with Brad, he will share why businesses must earn their employees' commute by creating community and purpose, how to champion flexible modern workplaces that drive connection and performance, strategies for scaling culture and impact in a hybrid and distributed workforce, and the evolving role of leaders in designing work experiences that empower the humans behind your brand. Chiefs, without further ado, let's hear from the wonderful Brad Krauskopf. Chiefs, we're here with the one and only Brad Krauskopf, founder and CEO of Hub Australia. Brad, welcome to the Inner Chief.
Thank you for having me here. It's good to be here and looking forward to a great conversation.
Brad, I think this is super topical. The workplace of the future, flexible work environments now, people working from home, engagement, AI coming in. This is right on point. We need to get to the bottom of what's happening in the world and drawing on your expertise. Before we do all that, though, one of our great traditions at the Inner Chief is to know where our CEOs have come from. So can you tell a bit of a story that sums up your childhood and early life?
Sure thing. So, look, from the family side of things, I think a good snapshot would be Christmases were either in the roaring heat of country New South Wales with 20 to 50 of cousins and aunties and uncles and what forth on my mum's side of the family,
Oh.
or it would have been a much smaller gathering of, say, 3 or 4 or 6 of us or something like that, anywhere from Germany to the USA to Chile, if it was my dad's side of the family for Christmas.
Oh, wow.
So mixing it up. And then I think I was trying to think of an interesting entrepreneurial story. I've always been self-employed my whole career. And
Mm.
I call my first entrepreneurial venture was in primary school. And I was selling a newspaper, which was called the Melbourne Metro Times. And it was a single A4 page folded newspaper
Yeah.
that I sold for 10 cents at school. And if I had a good week, it meant I got maybe 20 newspapers sold, which equaled a $2 lolly bag. And you'd get a lot of lollies back then. And
Yeah.
the highlight in this newspaper was we had a little thing called the Looney Tunes, which was just a straight copy of something, and everybody will give away their age if they know this one. The Age youth newspaper in Melbourne used to do something called the Odd Spot, and it used to have a great little story in that, and we had a great amount of fun distributing those through our primary school newspaper.
That is pretty cool. Well done. So then your first ever job, I suppose that sounds like it might be. What about real paid jobs?
Yeah. Actually, no, there's no theme of newspapers here, but I did do the newspaper delivery one.
Right.
But yeah, in the theme of jobs that don't exist anymore, this was one of the ones where I pulled up outside the front of a business, like an office, and then you walk through the office with 20 newspapers under your arm going, hey, who wants a newspaper? Who wants a newspaper? And people would actually buy the newspaper off you at their desk. You would sometimes get a tip, and then you'd get back to you get back at the end of the day, and hopefully you've sold a bunch of, more newspapers than you were left carrying.
Mm.
And that was the job.
Wow, that is pretty cool.
I did do indeed. I did do a stint at McDonald's, as was also very popular in the 90s.
Well, we all started in the same place, right? And your first ever car, Brad?
A Hyundai Excel. Again, a very 90s car. It was called a bubble car. I don't think people are even able to sell them secondhand these days because no one would buy them. But it was a very popular car in the early 90s.
Oh yeah, that was almost sort of funnily, almost an icon of the 90s, that Excel.
Indeed.
Yeah. Mate, look, let's fast forward because I really want to get into this, like the journey for Hub and what the workplace of the future looks like. Now you're the founder and CEO of Hub, Australia's largest privately owned flexible workplace operator. Can you tell us a bit about Hub? What makes it a little bit different to others?
Yeah. So look, ultimately we consider ourselves a workspace experience company. So we have businesses and their teams have their office at Hub, but more so what's happening there is that a business or an organization is choosing Hub because it helps them attract and retain the best talent. So all of the businesses that are at Hub, they're competing in a labour market. The office is one of the tools that they have in the toolbox to help them compete with all of the other companies that want to have the best talent. We differentiate ourselves on that hospitality flavour of experience. Ultimately, people keep coming back because of the experience that they have at Hub. They've invested a lot on the culture and impact side of things, and in particular, we've been a B Corp for 13 years now, and we were also the first co-working space globally to be certified carbon neutral. So we've invested a lot in that over the years. And now also what's really relevant post-pandemic is having a national network of spaces so that businesses can tap into a diverse range of different workspaces for their teams to work from.
I'm really quite amazed at having worked across a lot of professions and industries and elite sport and business. I'm actually when you really think about it, workspaces are incredibly diverse. I remember working at that Queensland Reds, the rugby team, back in 2015, and you get to their workplace, and their workplace, as you walk in the door, says high performance unit. And I often thought to myself, wouldn't it be interesting if we could go on a bit of a journey with companies about their office spaces being more about instead of just a place to work, a place to create high performance and flow and energy and connection and creativity and innovation. Because I've been into probably thousands of workplaces now, and I don't often think they're quite set up for that. What's your thing as a future of workplace? What space?
Ooh. Yeah, no, sure thing. Look, certainly what we're going to see is that the workplace is not going to be any one place. Like, it's going to be a network of spaces. It's definitely not going to be this binary choice of work from home or work from headquarters. And ultimately, I see workspace is more of a place for learning, innovating, socializing. If anything, it's more of a school or a university than what we think of as a traditional office. We can also say workspace will be on demand. And I don't just mean it's going to be the physical kind of workspace. So if you think about it, already the most popular meeting room in the world is not the boardroom. It's the digital space, the Zoom room, the online video conference, whatever that may be. And that's where we spend a huge amount of our time, perhaps even more than working from home or working from headquarters. And those digital spaces are going to become more and more immersive. And whilst it might not be you or me that, the thought that we'd suddenly have VR goggles on or something like that, the tech, by the time my 7-year-old daughter will have got into the workforce, she's going to think about workspace in a whole nother different way again. So when we look forward, it's not so much the physical space when I think about the workplace of the future. It's what are those experiences that you're going to provide where you're bringing people together. So it's much more experimental. It's much more programmatic. And whether that's through geography, whether that's through the type of space, or whether it's merging those physical and digital workspaces together, it's certainly going to be different from what it is now.
I suppose the question is, if you're CEO, Chief People Officer, and you're thinking, okay, our business is going into the future, we've got to transform, adapt, we've got potentially quite a different kind of workforce in the future. What is it? What have they got to be thinking about, or what have they got to consider as most important in their next workspace?
Sure thing. So I'm going to start that with, so we just did our annual industry report, Love Where You Work. And one of the key data points that came out of it is that the single biggest reason that people are going into the office are the social connections that they're making. So kind of like, first up, in response to your question there, it's the workspace is not necessarily about work. It's about connecting. It's about learning. So the first tip I'd give to any CEO or GM or somebody that's thinking about their next workspace is really have a think of what's the purpose of that workspace for my organization. And it is for your organization. Ultimately, the workspace that you create is an extension of your brand. So often when people look at co-working, and this is one of the reasons why flexible workspaces have become so popular, is that there's lots of different kinds of co-working and lots of different flexible workspaces, just like there are lots of different hotels. And the idea is we want to stay at a co-working space. We want to work at a co-working space that matches our culture and matches our brand, because ultimately our team, our customers, our investors are going to be coming into that office. And so it's not about how many desks I've got or how many meeting rooms I've got. It's what does that office say about my brand, about my culture. That's where I'd be starting.
I was just thinking back to your thought around, it's not just about work, it's the social, it's the creativity, it's the collaboration between people. People can go away and do the tasks of their job. Maybe they can do that from home reasonably effectively, but there's a place that will create that sense of higher performance, and people are really yearning for that. I think on the back of perhaps a swing to work from home not quite working as well as we hoped initially. So they need to be considering, how does the workplace serve that?
Exactly. And like most companies are not Amazon, and most companies are not Atlassian. So like on one side, You have one company saying, don't ever come to the office. And on the other one, it's, come to the office all the time. I don't know, where most companies in the world are not those companies. And the kind of people that work at those companies are not most of the people in the world. So in that middle, there's a lot of different ways of working, and we've got to find out like what is right for my company and for the people there. And if you think about it, like the people coming to work, they might have to spend $10 on a tram, $50 for the car spot if you drove, $20 for lunch, $10 for coffee. By the time that person's come to work, it's cost them $50. So what is the experience I'm going to get by getting out my wallet and ultimately going into work for a day? Because I could just stay at home and my wallet could stay in my top drawer. So what's that experience that I'm expecting? And it's kind of like the expectations of my employer and a day of work and of my office, they just keep growing. And that's where we see that, like, again, that links back to where people come into to co-working spaces. Like, for instance, at Hub, we've got a welcome desk with a concierge. We've got a work well program, which brings all of these health and wellness things into the workspace. There's a lifestyle concierge, there's learning. So all of these different things, it's so hard to create all of that when actually I just need to get on growing my marketing business or growing my software as a service business. So it's that office and the expectations of it have really grown to such a high standard that I'd also put to CEOs that you really need to think about, is the office actually something that I should now just outsource to somebody else? Just like I've outsourced my IT infrastructure, now I've got to a level of expectation that my people have that maybe I'm actually better off outsourcing my office and focusing on the core activities of my business.
So if we flip this question and say, what should they consider? What's the flip side to what CEOs, chief people officers considering that maybe they shouldn't be, maybe should be down the bottom?
Yeah. So look, I guess that first one is when we think about offices, we think about, I need X square meters for Y number of people, or I need X desks for Y number of people. And it's the wrong way to be thinking about it. Of course, that is ultimately a big driver of the cost. But ultimately, you want to start with what are the kinds of work that people are going to need to come together and work on to make my organization successful. So what are the types of activities as opposed to the number of people or the number of meters? And also, we quite often, when you look at most P&Ls, particularly the type of P&Ls of companies that work from Hub, the single biggest cost on their P&Ls is almost always staff. And then what we do is we look for how can we squeeze every last cent out of the workspace that we're asking these really expensive people to work from. So quite often we penny pinch on the office, but really the whole point of the office is to attract and retain all of those really expensive people, which is the most expensive item and the most important thing on my P&L, and of course for my organization. So let's think about how we can create a workspace experiences for those people. And that'll be a good starting point, rather than thinking just about the meters squared or the cost of it.
Chief, now, are you in need of an operating rhythm? An operating rhythm is that schedule of meetings. Actually, it's a bit more than that. It's a system, the drumbeat of your team. And what it will do if you get it right is it will create the culture, it will drive the results, it will bond the team together, it will handle risk, help you see around corners, create creativity, embed the rituals and traditions of your team. There is so much that an operating rhythm can deliver when done right. So Chief, if you'd like to know how to do that, just get our full free resource on it. Just go to chiefmaker.com/operating rhythm, and there is a detailed PDF there with all the hows and whats and whys, some of the pitfalls, and an example schedule for you to follow. chiefmaker.com/operating rhythm, and create the drumbeat for success in your team. Here's a scenario for you, Brad. I'm going to give you a silver bullet.
Okay.
You get to change one aspect of workspaces around the world. Just one. Think of all the offices out there. What's one thing you would change?
All right. I'll give you one. If you like my answer, I'll give you two. And you can give me two.
Okay.
But first, the workspace should not be empty. Like there's nothing more useless than an empty workspace. And so often what we've got now is that people are coming in for their one day at work and the office is empty. Or people are coming into, or you've got the CEO or the property department, and they're coming in, they're going, damn, this workspace is empty. I just need to shrink it, or why bother even having one? People are coming into the workspace because they want the social connection. You would have heard people talking about the loneliness epidemic. All of these things can be, the office is a key way that people solve these things. So let's not have empty workspaces. Another good reason to be going for co-working, because then you spread the risk of people coming in on a day when nobody else is in the office. You spread that across hundreds of different organizations and thousands of different teams. So there's a good chance that when you come into the workspace, there'll be other people there.
Okay. Second one.
We're seeing a lot of companies do what we call workplace window dressing. It's like people are saying that their office is something when it's not. Or, our culture is this, but it's really that. Or our workspace is amazing, but it's not. So people have a really good bullshit detector for this stuff. And if your office is not what the label says, people will see through that. And whilst you might convince the person to take the job, that's also the person that leaves you after 6 months. So trying to line up all of those different things is really important. And that'd be, if I had a second bullet, that'd be the other one that I'd get rid of.
Stop your crappy window dressing.
Indeed.
Yeah, right. Okay. So what would be one thing you would keep about offices around the world?
Okay. A cafe. So the one thing that I would keep at Hub, so it actually used to be, it used to be the member kitchen. So back when most of the customers and membership at Hub were 1 and 2 and 3 person businesses or startups or not for profits, the member kitchen was the most important thing. As we grew and we ended up with more employees coming into Hub from different businesses, i.e. our customer base is mostly, 5 to 30 person businesses. The cafe, and this is also even more so post-pandemic, that's that spot where you want to walk in the door and it's nothing worse when you get out of an elevator at a workspace and all you've got is some poor person sitting at a concierge desk and there's a big white wall behind them and there's nothing else going on. We deliberately make it that when you walk into a Hub, there's a noisy cafe, you can smell the coffee, there's a smiling person at a welcome desk, more like what you'd expect when you walk into a busy hotel lobby.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of buzz that you want to have when I come in. When I spent my $50 to decide to come to work for a day, rather than sit lonely at the kitchen table at home. That's the kind of experience that I want to have. So the most important element I think in the workspace is the cafe and that arrival experience.
Okay. I like it. Okay. Brad, I want to talk about the Hub journey a bit, and then we want to talk about just general workplace engagement. Okay. So you a lot of people would know sort of the WeWork story and how that had a particular journey, but you're also backed by private investors. What have you learned from WeWork?
Look, they're probably not going to make a movie about me. They might get, might get Jared. Yeah, Jared Leto might be the actor, but maybe not.
Who would you really like to play you?
Actually, I probably would pick. I probably would go for it. That'd be quite good. Maybe a Ryan Gosling or something like that.
That sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Right, you're onto it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So look, it's very easy to get caught up in a cult of Adam Newman, and it's very easy to throw things at WeWork as to how they got wrong. Look, WeWork also got a lot of things right, and actually also got co-working on the map. So I'm gonna identify a couple here that I think are important and go beyond kind of the hype. So VC venture capital money never belonged in real estate in the first place. Okay, so like VC money, a lot of it's there about they want to get a 100x return or what for, like it's baked into the model.
Sure. Yep.
Trying to scale a real estate business to get 100x return it's impossible. You can't just flick a switch and ask for some more software, some more space on Azure or Amazon or what for. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
The other one is that because WeWork got all of this VC money, it adopted a blitz scaling strategy where it was never going to be a winner takes all market in the first place. But we a typical thing of an Uber, they blitz scaled, but now they own the market. Although we even saw in other markets, they blitz scaled, but then Grab won all of the market and they merged together. But usually scaling works really well if there's going to be one or two or three players at the end of the day. Even in flex workspace is a subset of commercial office. Depending on which city you're in, it's still only 2 up to maybe 10% of all of the commercial office in any given market. And that's after all of the WeWork hype and everything that's gone over the last 10 years. And then even then in the flex and co-working market, you would not go to any market where IWG and WeWork, the two global players, have more than 20% of the market. So it's massively fragmented. Mm-hmm. But back to your question there on a couple of the big learnings that I saw, and I think this is applicable to any industry: venture capital, private equity, friends, family, fools, the classic startup ones, seed capital. You've got to get your capital from the right source because they're all going to expect different returns on different timelines. And that's incredibly important. And then remember also, like, your market will also dictate a lot as to what kind of strategy you should employ in order to grow.
Yeah, I think this probably leads us directly to the next question, which is, what's been the difference that made the difference for Hub? I suspect it's because and you've stuck to it.
Yes, we stuck to our mission, but we've also we haven't been afraid to reinvent ourselves over the last 13 years. Honestly, there's been countless times where I've taken months or years to change rather than what I should have done in days or weeks. But we have evolved as the industry's evolved and as the circumstances such as the pandemic have evolved. Well, I can certainly think through 3 really distinct phases of Hub over the last 13 years of the journey. And that has meant, really hard decisions around, where staff people would no longer have connected as much to the organization that they joined, to the organization that it became, or customers that have joined with us. But then as it evolved on, maybe they weren't exactly the best fit. And so us having the courage to actually let it change has been an incredibly important part of us still being around.
Can you almost give a theme to those 3 chapters?
Yes, look, I'd probably do it more from a side of in particular, the customer. So the customer changed from the startup freelancer side of things to the growing business. And during that second stage of Hub, we worked really hard also at creating a great place to work for our team. As we've come into the third stage of things, what we've found is that we actually need to create a high performance great place to work. And a lot of the culture that we created during the second stage of Hub pre-pandemic, that worked then. But now we've realised we need to be a lot more nimble. We need to be a lot more targeted with how we operate the business. And all of what we need in this third stage of hub post pandemic is very different to what we needed pre-pandemic. And that's taken, that's just taken a huge amount of commitment, both from the investors, from the team, to really stick it out and say, okay, what is that workspace going to be post-pandemic, and where can Hub offer the most value to that?
What was the most difficult moment in those phases?
I definitely say the navigating out of the pandemic. Like I know some people will be listening to this in months from now or what for, but we're coming up on 5 years since the pandemic. So in a couple of months from now is when I got back from Singapore at Changi Airport, and for those who have been to Changi Airport, I got there and the arrivals hall at Changi was empty, and it's kind of that's not possible. And I remember getting back to Australia, going, hang on, something's happening, and like, that's like 5 years ago, damn it. And we deal with workspaces which take years in advance to figure out how we set them up, and also very expensive with how we adapt them. And so the ride out of the pandemic, in terms of figuring out what's next, it kind of feels like this has been a 5-year journey, and it's not finished yet. So I would certainly say that it's this latest transition from Hub pre-pandemic to Hub post-pandemic has without a doubt been the most challenging.
How do you use your own business operating rhythm to stay focused?
Yeah, sure. So look, this is a big thing for me, and I definitely drive a lot of the organisation crazy with all my focus on the rhythm. Like, for me, it definitely helps with how I make sense of everything. When you're running in an industry that is changing very quickly, and like that's not, the Hub's not special, like, as every industry is moving at a ridiculously fast pace at the moment. Having a rhythm to your organization, I feel, is really helpful. And what I mean by that is, like, what happens daily, what happens weekly, what happens monthly, what happens quarterly, annually, every 3 years. If people understand what is that pulse that your organization has, then at least something it happens every day. And I guess, and where I often see, on the flip side of that, where people go wrong with all of that, you can't think that just because you say this is the rhythm, you also need to explain to people what their role contributes to the bigger whole. So if somebody's running along and they know that they've got a monthly target to pull, 1,000 coffees and get a customer experience score of 9.6 or more, and then they've done their job, they need to know how that contributes to the P&L statement for that particular workspace. They want to know how that ultimately contributes to the 12-month plan or the 3-year plan. So I've seen a lot there where it's not just enough to go, this is our rhythm. You've also got to explain to people where their rhythm makes an impact on the bigger whole. Because if people don't feel connected to the bigger part of the organization, then you lose that connection with the company, and you know what, they're probably the first person that's going to walk out the door on you. But yeah, I've found a rhythm incredibly helpful at Hub.
No, you got a partner in crime there. Coming elite sport, like, the rhythm is just so critical because the margins are so fine. What is your most important or favorite meeting that you have in your rhythm?
I'm going to call out the one that I kind of often, whenever new people join the team, I always say jokingly that this is the only thing that I've ever implemented that's kind of like work and stuck, or somebody hasn't like said that's a silly idea and improved upon it. I think new people, when they join the organization, maybe think I'm being funny, but I actually think it might be the only thing that's still stuck around. We do something called our daily play. So we all go into Slack each day. Teams is another popular one that other organizations use, and people need to post what's their number one priority for the day, the P, what's the one thing that they learned yesterday, the L, either at work or outside of work, something awesome, which is the A. Again, it could be at work, it could be outside of work. And then why we just did that because it's spelt play, but then somebody pointed out that the why could be, how are you feeling each day? And that's just from 1 to 5. So give us your priority, learning, and awesome, and how you're feeling from 1 to 5. And we initially put it in when we suddenly went from being just in Melbourne to being in Sydney and Adelaide. And it created a bit of a connection between everybody and their different and their days. And that was back when we had like 10 of us. We're over 100 now, and it seems to have stuck. It's amazing how many people who do still post to it every day, and amazing how many people do whisk down it every day. And it's kind of just become part of our, a ritual or something like that we do. And it just connects you. I have heard stories of, like if you've got a concierge in Queensland that can then, they know a concierge that they met at some gathering a while back in Melbourne, if that they'll be able to have a rough sense of how they're doing.
Sure. Yeah. That's really cool. I've not heard that one before. Play. Okay, Brad, what are you most proud of?
Great Place to Work certification, accreditation. So, and look, this is one of those ones where it's not like I never set out to create a bad place to work, but with the benefit of many years of doing this by now, there have been times where I know that Hub could have been a much better place to work than it was. About 6 years ago, we did one of those things where, if we create a great place to work, there's probably a pretty good, it's not rocket science to think that our team is going to then create a great place to work for all of our customers. So, it's not rocket science. And we started concentrating on great place to work. Look, there's lots of these different accreditations. We chose this one and it's worked great for us. And you just get a huge amount of data about what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And one of the things I'm proud of is that every year the things that we get fed back that we're doing wrong end up being not the same things that we get fed back the next year. Yeah. And you look, your work's never done on this, and certainly we've seen things go up and down, particularly as we've had to emerge from the pandemic, which has meant a lot of hard decisions and changes in the way that we worked. But we're really committed to that one, and I certainly had a hell of a lot more fun when I'm coming into work, and I know we're getting good, great place to work and our hub experience scores. So I'm really proud of that. And one of the big ways we've done that is through our Flexi Impact program, our carbon neutral, our B Corp. Certainly I've seen with creating teams, if you can connect people to feeling like they're being part of something bigger, it goes a long way. Like people don't, it doesn't matter which industry you're in, like whether you're, providing workspaces to people, producing podcasts or making software, people want to be able to connect with like the why of all of that. And certainly our commitments around the impact have been a big part of that.
Let's talk about this engagement, because that's really what we're talking about here now. What are beyond just workspace, what are you seeing in the research that's coming through the work you're doing, the core ingredients to building outstanding staff engagement?
Yeah, sure thing. So, and look, I can use these as two sides of the same coin for staff engagement and workplace. I always start with intentionality. Like this stuff does not just happen. If you wait around and do you do an odd cool gathering here or something like that, it's not going to end up creating that really special feeling that people are going to rave about. You need to make a decision and say, look, I am going to create an outstanding workplace engagement. Right, let's see how I do it. The second one is, this is not a project with a start and an end. It'll never end. You got to sign up to this commitment. And you know what? And there'll be times when you do this one that you've worked your guts out, but it hasn't given you the result that you had hoped, and you're actually just going to need to keep at it. The final one, and then I'll get more onto some examples, is you've got to make this someone's job. A classic thing here, smaller business, they'll give it to the office manager and they'll say, hey, you know what, can you be in start of, workspace engagement? Or they'll give it to the people and culture team, but then forget to make it a KPI for every one of their leaders across all of their different, all of the organization. You need to, in other words, what I'm saying is it needs to actually be something that you measure and that you make someone or everybody accountable for. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. Some of the things that we do at Hub, recently we've done something called Work Well Week, which had all manner of different presentations and learning opportunities for people about how to create wellness in the workspace. We do these things called Hub Lux moments. We do these for our customers, but for instance, companies could do these for their people, where we will have come up with a really considered gift that you give to somebody for, when they have an achievement, like, it could be anything from, a baby through to, getting a big deal through to winning a big grant, and particularly even if you can come up with things that are work related. Like if you can come up with a connection there and then just, celebrate those moments. Another one that I've found that I really love talking about is our partnership with Unyoked. So Unyoked do cabins in the forest, and they're also marketing those cabins to businesses and teams where they might do a meeting or one of their annual gatherings in a cabin, disconnected in nature. And look, all of these things there, you're talking to me about workspace engagement, and here I am going on about Hub Lux moments and Work Well and Unyo. All of these things help with making it about more than just a job. It's connecting people with experiences that they can relate to and really bring some meaning into, into their day at work.
Yeah, I'm just making a note or two here, the theme that's coming through, right? Because I think this is going to be a huge part of business going forward. The intentionality you mentioned, which is this thoughtfulness about what's in front of you. You have a team full of people. You have customers out there, and what people are looking for now is this human-to-human connection beyond a task, beyond a line item in Asana or whatever it is. I actually want to have some level of proper human connection and need to be valued by other people. And then that connecting with things like Unyoked, where you're slowing down. And a lot of this, in many ways, is just being a lot more human. Naturally, that's what we're great at. Like, humans are bloody good at connecting, caring for each other, doing something that's thoughtful, slowing down in nature. And in many ways, there's this, if you're the yin and the yang is maybe work hard, hustle a bit, then the slow down, the reconnect, and the slow down, the recovery, and the review back into this sort of performance mode. So I think there's a lot of that going on, which is so important going forward.
Agreed. Actually, I'll call out two things there. Don't try and have 100 good things in your workspace. Try and have 3 to 5 amazing things in your workspace, because otherwise it just becomes noise, and so many of them will drop away. Yep. And then you'll get to the next year and somebody will say, oh, why didn't we do this? Like, you know what? I just forgot. So do it. So busy, mate. Everyone's too busy. So just do things like that are amazingly well. And then another one that I'll draw in here is if you can figure out how to connect it to something local, it really helps. So, for instance, with Hub, we've got some partnerships, and we've gone out of our way to make sure that they're local brands, like whether that's Milligram, which does amazing stationery, or All Press Coffee, which is right around from where one of our first hubs were, or even Cocktail Porter, which does the cocktails at Hub Martin Place, again, a local brand, or Endota, another, a local wellness. Figuring out what are those little things that we can do, and then to connect it back to the word, I use the word intentionality, use the word thoughtful. Like, what are those things where you it wasn't just what you got at the top of the Google search, it was thoughtful, it was considered, and these are the ways that are going to create that experience.
Yeah, and so you're also talking about connecting to your local community, right? So that's that local connectiveness, right? Which I also think is being not deleted, but it's really missing for a huge number of people. They don't even know the names of the people who live 3 doors up from them. We're sort of quite disconnected from that, which is right in front of us.
Yeah.
If we can rebuild some of that, I think that is a great gift. That is a great gift.
Yeah. And this is another thing that people need to remember with the workspace. If you're working from home, so you've got your family, you've got your kids, or you might not have you might be living alone, or you might be living with friends, or whatever it might be, and then you don't know the names of your neighbours 3 doors up or even next door. The role of the workspace in going into work may actually be like so critical to so many parts of like how you identify as yourself, what your self-worth is, where you create those connections. So like, work is about so much more than work. And we really need to think of that when we're creating our workplaces.
I did a podcast just a few days ago. We were talking a lot about the power of story and how every person has a story. And in many ways, they're dying to tell it, or for someone else to know that story and say, hey, that's a great story. Like, you're a cool person. I like hearing your story. And without a workspace, you can't do that.
Can't do it. Yeah.
That is a coffee shop, cafe moment. It's a campfire moment at an unyoked, whatever it is. If we want to create any sense of people feeling valued, connected, tribalized to your business, the best way to do that is create deep human connection. And we gloss over it. And if it's glossed over, it's nothing for me to just go and transact with another business. I'll just walk to the SaaS or the bank or whatever that's 3 doors down, and I'll work for them. Because no loyalty to you. Why would I? I don't even know your story, mate. Like, I don't even know.
I almost feel like we just had a quick moment of turning the table in this podcast, and then
so we go on tangents here, and when we get in our soapbox, we got to go for it.
There's probably people on this listening to this podcast who are hoping we're going to, say how to design a workspace or something like that. And here we are talking about local, and there you go.
Yeah, but I think this is part of what you were saying before is the myth or the angle people are going down is perhaps not the right angle.
Right.
If we look through this kind of lens, and I love what you said before, like, what are you thinking about? What is the role of this? And there's a role to create energy, creativity, give them life, give them energy, create social connection, as opposed to a place where people work. And we need this many seats. So what's the end game? And I think that paradigm is going to be vital going forward.
So we've also got some stats that we've managed to get from this lovely work study. And so the top 3 things that team members say about what keeps them engaged at work and has a positive impact. So first up, they're looking for the workspace to help facilitate collaboration. It's got to provide a community feel. Yeah. And it's got to, and it increases engagement. I mean, it connects back to that. Like, if the workspace is empty, what's the point? And another one, which is interesting as well, particularly with the focus of this podcast, is we also see that team members look to the office for different things than the execs look to the office for. So it's important when you're sitting there as the exec, like what you think you need your office for is not necessarily what your team does. And in particular, we see a lot of execs saying that the office improves morale. Or, I'm thinking, I must have my office because that's how I'm going to get my buzz. Whereas though the team is actually looking for it in maybe a much more basic way. It's like, I just want to feel connected with my colleagues, like a much more basic instinct of why I'm coming into the office. Or, a classic one of, the execs will think people are more productive at the office. Maybe. Remember that there's lots of different types of people and types of working styles. And, we've seen recently, more attention to how extroverts work compared to introverts, or how a neurodiverse person will work differently to a neurotypical person. And, you've got to realize that your workspace needs to work for so many people. And even for those people, they'll want to work in different ways depending on what day of the week it is or how they're feeling at that particular moment. And that kind of goes to another big thing that I see about workspaces is where you need to build a really diverse range of different spaces to work at the office. So for instance, if the classic picture of all of the cubicles, or for instance, there's no cubicles, it's all open plan, or there's offices here or what forth, what people are more looking for is like, where's my quiet area? Where's my active area? Where's my cafe, more social area, or where's my learning area, or where's the area with the really good tech? Yep. So, and it's really hard for any one company to build out all of those different spaces in their one workspace, which is another big reason that we see that people put their businesses at Hub or other co-working spaces. It's because those spaces have already invested in all of those different types of diverse working options so that people can work how they want when they come into the office so that they are most productive.
Righto, Chiefs. More from Brad in a minute. Now, recently, we continued our Best Of series by featuring the legendary Perry Marshall, author and sales and marketing guru. We spoke about redefining the 80-20 rule, buying time and solving the world's toughest problems. Here's what Perry had to say about using Pareto's law to inform bold but effective staffing decisions.
I have a high retention rate. My employees stay with me for a long time. I have fired 3 or 4 times more people than have quit, okay? That's normal. And if you have a high turnover, maybe it won't be that extreme, but I'm telling you, you have to make these hard decisions or you will pay. And by the way, a bad employee costs a company 4 to 14 times their salary.
You can listen to that incredible conversation with Perry by going to chiefmaker.com/362. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the podcast and check out all the other great interviews with our chiefs and gurus, as well as all the minisodes by going to chiefmaker.com/listen now. Righto, Chief, let's get back to Brad Krauskopf of Hub Australia. Brad, bit of a left field kind of question. When you build a hub, what you can put into it, like you're saying, all these amazing things, you invest your capital, right? But I'm sure there's things on that list of things you'd like to put in, but your little capital head goes, can't put that in. We'll never get a return. Oh my God, this would be so good. What's a couple of things on? If I had the capital, I would just love to put that in. Free reign.
Definitely you'd have really big outdoor areas. We've got outdoor areas in some of our organizations. I would love for them to be, much bigger. The problem is, particularly if you're in Melbourne or look indeed anywhere, sometimes it's too damn hot or it's too damn cold to work outside. And that would mean that space is not getting used all of the time. And I've got to kind of make every last square meter work in order to do things. But I'd love to have more outdoor areas. I would love to have more flexible meetings, more flexible spaces where it was really easy to just change things up. We used to have this cool thing that we used to literally, we would buy couches and we would put wheels on the bottom of the couches so you could move them around. Now, that was all well and good, but do you know how hard and difficult it is to then go and reset everything at the end of that? And then there's fire codes, there's egress, there's all of these different things, or where the electricity runs or where the sound runs. There's a lot of different things where flexible workspaces can be so inflexible because how they set things up, it's incredibly hard to change things around. So I would love to have the freedom to go like that and change my workspace, but it's a really challenging thing to do. And then look, just as a final one, and one that we are hoping to do, building in like prototype spaces. So like a space where it's kind of like it doesn't have a purpose other than to prototype new things. Like, for instance, I'd love to grab one of the unyoked cabins and just plonk it into this space at Hub one time. Or I'd love to call up Zoom and get them to come in with all the latest Apple headsets or what forth, and then we'll set up, digital full multimedia digital spaces. So just having that space to experiment would be amazing.
Yeah. You don't have to count that meters squared return, right?
Yes, indeed.
Oh, Brad, this has been fantastic, mate. I think we could probably go on for another hour or two. I have a few rapid fire questions we ask all our chiefs. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. If you could form the ultimate executive team from any well-known leader from any time in history, can't use anyone you've currently got, who would your first three picks and what roles would you put them in?
All right. I am going to take this in a slightly different way. Okay, because we've been talking about experiences the whole way through.
Yep.
And so when we're thinking about workspace experiences, so what I would like to do is I would like to take something like the Hoxton Hotel, which has this really great mix of social and work and connection to local. They're owned by Ennismore and they're over in London and a few other cities. So I'd take them, I'd combine it with a Ritz-Carlton, because who doesn't like some impeccable 5-star service? Or then we all love food and drink, and we all know that nobody ever came up with a good business idea without some good food and drinks involved. So I'd go to something like the Gimlet or Apollo Inn here in Melbourne for a great experience. And then to combine a bit of the outdoors, and you're getting a little bit out of Melbourne, I'd then go to Jackalope down on the Mornington Peninsula. So look, what I've just done there is I've grabbed a whole bunch of different hospitality experiences. And if I mushed all of those together, that's how I would create the best workspace experience that I possibly could.
That's pretty awesome.
I encourage others to think of what would be what would be the experiences that you put together in order to create the workspace that would work for your organization?
That's a great question. Yeah. Well, we'll make sure the links to those venues are in the show notes so people can check them out. Okay, what's the best advice a mentor has ever given you?
Okay, so I'm going to be contrarian again. So one of the biggest things that I've learned from mentor relationships over the years is to remember that it's you who is making the decisions. You can learn, you can pose questions and what forth to the mentor, but they're never actually going to know your business as well as you do. Yeah. And I have definitely fallen into the trap of kind of like doing something because that's what my mentor said. It's, a mentor's there to help you inform, but at the end of the day, it's you who makes the decisions.
That's right. It's almost like this sounding board and filter, but you need to have a filter on the way back in.
Yeah.
Because there's no coach or mentor in the world that has the context you've got. Impossible to get.
Exactly. Like you're still the inner chief to riff off you.
Yeah. Hey, what's your number one interview question when looking for people to join your leadership team?
Yeah. So most people that join Hub, particularly in senior roles, they're coming from a different industry. And so what I like to ask them is for them to give their predictions for Hub and our industry. And what happens is you really put them on the spot with requiring them to have thought through where the industry's going. And again, and you're not so much looking for them to come up with the key answers that they could have got from reading any cool article or listening to a podcast. You're really looking to see them having applied a thinking process, because particularly when you're interviewing execs, you need people who can think strategy. Like we yes, we'll have to solve day-to-day tactical things, but really what we're looking for and what I'm looking for is a wing person to help me on the strategy, like to help me figure out, what I'm not seeing and figuring out which direction to point. So that's what I ask them in an interview.
Okay. Can you nominate another CEO with great respect that should be on the podcast?
Okay. So look, if you want to reach for the skies, I've got a load of respect with what Satya Nadella has done at Microsoft at the moment, and particularly like in workspace. We could really do with a few people who are really thinking of, how do we fundamentally take, something that's almost old-fashioned and considered done, and then making it all new again, but a little bit closer to home. Go and reach out to Cameron and Chris over at Unyoked. They're super cool guys. I got to do an event with them recently, and I just really loved how they're looking at things and their enthusiasm for creating something which, I really just think has a really important place.
Okay, 2 questions to go, mate. If you could lead any company in the world other than your own, what would it be?
Look, something probably more like around the health and wellness, and probably a great experience that I had just recently was I went up to Gwingana, which is like a retreat up in the Gold Coast hinterlands. And, it was like a 4-day break that was, the equivalent of a 4-week holiday, or better than a 4-week holiday. And I would really love to be, applying my efforts to something like that organisation. It was great.
Wow, that'd be cool, hey? Okay, Brad, a final message of wisdom and hope.
Be courageous. I think as we go forward, and we're looking at, particularly in a world of AI and what forth, what are the execs and what are we as people going to still need to be really good at that, machines are not going to be? And I think being courageous is a really good trait that you can really focus in on, and is going to be particularly important to everybody and when they're looking to grow businesses and organisations in the future.
Brad, what an awesome hour or so, mate. I really appreciate it. It's fascinating where you're going. I know a lot of people have taken all sorts of note of what they can do for their workspace. Thank you for your time and energy.
Thank you for your time and energy. Much appreciated.
Chief, that sums it up for this week in what is a hot topic in the business world. How do we engage our people? How do we work in this hybrid working environment? What do we need to be as leaders in the future? Chief, all the resources can be found at chiefmaker.com/363, including all the links to Brad and Hub Australia. And if you would like to stay in touch and hear all about some of the best resources you can find anywhere in the world to improve your performance at work, go to chiefmaker.com/subscribe. Now, Chief, if you're yet to rate the episode and subscribe, I hope you'll do so soon. It helps others see the magnificent value that the chiefs and gurus bring to their life and career. So make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app now, give it a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and leave a short review about your favourite episode. Righto, Chiefs, as always, remember to stay epic.